Hi everybody, this is September 11th, 2025. This is part of my video journal of the recovery from the trauma of losing my little brother, Paul Kierans, 65 with Down syndrome, who was locked up by the BC New Democratic Party government for 588 days after I complained to the Burnaby RCMP about what I allege is a fraudulent and forged power of attorney they created to give him the COVID-19 shot. The government appointed my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who had never lived with Paul, as his guardian secretly. It took me a year to find out in a court application. And then after I complained to the Burnaby RCMP about this fraudulent and forged power of attorney, I know it was forged because I taught my brother to print the only word that he could print, which was his first name, Paul. It took me about a year as a little girl. So I'm very familiar with the signature, and it was a forgery. And he was too low functioning to appoint a representative. He never functioned above the level of a 15-month-old infant. So after Paul died, the government and the nun went after me to have me declared a vexatious litigant. So I was trained as a lawyer. I was the first single mother to graduate in British Columbia from law school. I went through a lot. I practiced law until I was disabled in an accident in 2008. But they went after me and had me declared a vexatious litigant, taking away my access to the courts like any other normal human being would have in Canada, whether they're immigrants or Canadians. Everyone has access to the courts, but they took it away from me because they found out that I knew they were being investigated by the RCMP, and they wanted to discredit me as a witness. So I'm thinking about, where we're at right now is I appealed the decision to the British Columbia Court of Appeal. I was before a panel of 3 justices, and I was not successful. And then I prepared an application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. It's very rare that people are granted permission to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada in Ottawa. I believe they get about 800 applications a year and only about 60 are allowed. But I have a good feeling about this one. I'm just waiting to hear back from everything that I can do has been done. All the documents have been filed, and I'm just waiting to hear back from the court. But I feel pretty positive. I think it's an important case. Being declared a vexatious litigant, what I've learned from my research is that the procedural safeguards have to be, if you're going to take away somebody's access to the courts, the procedural safeguards have to be rigorously followed. And in my case, they weren't followed at all. The judge went ahead past, I have a 2-hour time limit in court because I have a heart condition, and she went back past 2 hours. My materials weren't included in the application binders she had before her until after I left. When she went past the 2 hours, then I got up and left. And then apparently later she told the nun's lawyers, she has a law firm from Ottawa and a law firm from Vancouver, like an international big $1,000 an hour law firm. And so they didn't include my materials or my evidence in the materials before the judge until after I left, if at all, and I don't believe that they ever did. There's no evidence in the court file that they ever did. And then they filed a brand new notice of application the morning of the hearing that was 10 pages longer, or 9 pages longer than what's allowed. Normally you're given notice of the notice of application, so you know the case that's against you, but they filed a new notice of application the morning of the hearing that was 9 pages longer than what's allowed. And they relied on an affidavit of one of their former secretaries. When you bring an application like this in court, the person who files the affidavit has to have personal knowledge of what happened. But they used the affidavit of one of their old secretaries that I've never met and who wasn't involved, didn't know anything about me or my litigation. And the judge dismissed I had applications before her. I was trying to reinstate Paul's right to visit me and for him to be examined by experts. And she dismissed those applications as being moot because Paul had died. But then she went ahead with this vexatious litigant application against me to take away my rights, even though Paul had died. So it was unfair. She put my life in jeopardy, potentially put my life in jeopardy by going past my 2-hour limit. And none of the other procedural safeguards that you would normally expect in court were followed. So I have I don't think there's been a case like this in Canada, and it's an important issue. If you're going to take away someone's access to the courts, it's a very gravely serious issue. And so I think I've got a pretty good shot at being granted leave to appeal, which means I'll have to write another argument and I'll have to appear before the 9 judges of the Supreme Court of Canada. So that's where that is at right now. It's, obviously very stressful waiting to hear back from the court. But what I was thinking about today, I was just preoccupied with thinking about this assassination of Charlie Kirk. I've been following him. I followed the last election, the American election, very closely. And Charlie Kirk is a conservative speaker and he's a self-educated, conservative, and religious person. And because I'm interested in debate per se, I watched his debates very closely. And I don't agree with everything that he said by any means, but he was always rigorously fair. And he actually would structure his debates so that the people that didn't agree with him would go first. And he would let them have their piece. They had an opportunity before tens of thousands or thousands of people to express their viewpoint, and then he would respond. So I'd actually watched many of his debates on university campuses, and he was very kind and very fair. He was never rude or insulting to anyone. He was a very religious man, and obviously that guided his principles and his philosophy. He knew a lot about the Bible. But when I saw this sort of paroxysm of self-indulgent, cruel, vicious jubilation at his murder, a dad. Now, I just lost my brother last year, my last surviving family member from a big family. 6 kids and my mom living here on the West Coast in Greater Vancouver, and everybody's gone but me. And then this poor man with a young wife and 2 little babies is murdered in front of his family in the most despicable, cowardly way, and people are jubilant. It just shook me. I'm just starting to come out of it. I was so upset. But I was thinking about 9/11. My experience with 9/11 was quite unusual in that I visited New York City with my daughter and my sister, actually the sister with whom I'm having this dispute. or who had me declared a vexatious litigant, who turned out to be quite an evil nut. But I revisited her the summer of 9/11, and I was in New York City. We were in New York City on September the 8th. So the Sunday, 9/11 was a Tuesday morning. And that Sunday, we were tourists in New York City. And all of the New Yorkers would tell us to go to the World Trade Center and visit the World Trade Center. The taxi drivers and everybody would say, "Oh, have you seen the World Trade Center? You got to see the World Trade Center." And so we made a point of going there in the morning. And I got to the threshold of the North Tower. I believe it's the North Tower. We got to the door, heading up to the observation deck, and I just got this really weird feeling on the threshold. Like the hairs on, it's never happened before or since, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And I had my daughter with me and my sister, and I just said, no, we're not going in there. And we didn't step past the threshold. And I think they thought I was crazy. They didn't understand, why I wouldn't go in, because we'd done every single other touristy thing that you can do in New York City. And we had taken a cab specifically to go and visit the World Trade Center. But I had a terrible feeling of foreboding that I have never felt before or since. And then we went back to Rhode Island, and we actually left from the Boston airport to fly back to Vancouver from the same airport from which one of the planes, or two of them, departed on the 11th. So the day before 9/11, we were traveling from the same airport. And I had a normal work day on Tuesday, September the 11th, and my alarm clock went off, and it was very quiet. There was no music. It was just the news reporter just said the World Trade Center. This would have been about 6 a.m. So it would have been just at the time that the World Trade Center was attacked with the time difference. And they said the World Trade Center has been attacked by jets flying into it. And I thought I was dreaming. I thought, oh, you just were there 2 days ago, so you're dreaming about it. But then I woke up and I realized, so I raced downstairs and I turned on the TV just as one of the towers, the second tower, collapsed. I saw it on TV, and my daughter was there, and I just was crying, and I said, "You're watching thousands of people dying right before your eyes." And I was just so shocked. And I packed up, I had a little mini black and white TV, and I packed it up, and I took it to my office. I had a full-blown law office running, and I had a secretary, and we tried to do a normal work day. But it was just, nothing has ever been the same since then. The whole world has really changed, because the day that we were visiting, that Sunday, it would have been the 9th, Sunday, September the 9th, when we were visiting, New York City was so bright and sunny, and everyone was so happy and cheerful and jolly, and the whole world just seemed to be on a high. And then after the World Trade Center, after 9/11, then nothing's ever been the same since then. People have become suspicious and dark and cruel. And this assassination of Charlie Kirk I just prayed so hard that he would survive. I hoped so much that he would survive for his family. Freedom of speech is the most important freedom, because without it, we can't have any of the others. And the left, the people infected with this woke mind virus. I was trained as a psychologist, and I practiced as a psychologist before I went into law. And these people, these leftists, are infected with the woke mind virus. You can see it. They're like zombies. And they say that they believe in peace, but when they get the chance, they act out in violence. And they say they believe in free speech, but they only believe in the speech that they believe is appropriate. And this assassination of Charlie Kirk was it just shook me to my core. I lived through, and I remember very distinctly, John F. Kennedy's assassination. I'll just say, I was a little girl. My grandmother, the only grandparent, or what? No, I met two of my grandparents. My father's mother died 2 days, about 2 or 3 days before John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963. And my dad packed us all up in Sudbury and took us in his station wagon, drove us to Montreal, and we stayed in a hotel. And we were in the middle of the wake for my grandmother, and my older sister dragged me across the street to buy some cigarettes on the corner. I still remember, it was the corner of Giroir and Sherbrooke in Montreal. And we were standing at the counter, and she was waiting to buy her cigarettes, and she could hear on this little transistor radio that John F. Kennedy had been shot. And my sister screamed. She was 17. I was only 7. And she just screamed. And she just about yanked my arm out of its socket. And she said, John F. Kennedy has been killed. And I knew exactly what she meant. I really liked John F. Kennedy. I thought that he was, when somebody asked me what did I like best about Canada, I said that John F. Kennedy is our president. But my sister dragged me across the street, and they had a little black and white TV, same thing going in the funeral home where my grandmother was laid. And they had the black and white TV going nonstop.